Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, there's a number of multi-state salmonella outbreaks currently being investigated by both federal and state health officials. We got outbreaks with salami sticks, in seafood, and of course, the big one with the imported onions. Well, here to discuss the bacterium Salmonella and the infection, the multi-state outbreak linked to onions, and some general food safety and handling tips is Trevor Craig. Trevor is the food safety consultant and the food and nutrition director at Microbac. Well, hey, Trevor, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me back.
You bet. So let's start with the basics. What is salmonella and how common is it?
So salmonella is an enteroteric bacteria, meaning it's found in the gut, normally found in the guts of animals, and it is very, very common. There's about 2,500 serotypes of salmonella, which are like different varieties of salmonella, and it's naturally occurring in nature. So it's pretty common that you see it in a lot of different food products. It causes I think the last time I saw numbers like 1.5 million infections a year in the US. And those are infections that are actually identified and diagnosed. There's probably a lot of us who don't actually know that we have salmonella or never go to a hospital and never get tested. So that number could be even higher.
And this can be fatal too, right?
Yes. So salmonella, a lot of people do not know this, is typhoid fever. It was caused by a type of salmonella, Salmonella typhi. And it was very, very easily spread between very small populations and was very, very deadly. Luckily, there's a lot of treatments now, so there's not as many deaths as there once was. And Salmonella typhi is not really found in the US as much, but it is still a common foodborne pathogen. And Salmonella can cause salmonellosis, which is the disease caused by salmonella, which is a type of foodborne illness. And it's probably the most common foodborne illness.
Okay, so you mentioned foodborne illness. Other than foodborne illness, is there other ways to contract salmonella?
It is almost entirely linked from eating contaminated food. However, that can be contaminated in a lot of different ways. So sometimes you see people getting it from contaminated food prepared by someone who has salmonella, which was the case for Salmonella typhi and typhoid fever. Typhoid Mary famously was a symptomatic carrier of salmonella. So she never showed that she was sick, but she was not preparing food very cleanly. And that's what they believe started a lot of these outbreaks. It can be contaminated through water. It can be contaminated through soil. So there's a lot of ways that you can ingest it to get sick, but it's not airborne or anything like that to cause that kind of contamination or illness.
Right. So Trevor, what are the typical and the not so typical symptoms, the pathology that goes along with a salmonella infection?
So you can be completely atypical. People with very healthy immune systems or even introduced to salmonella very early on sometimes never show any symptoms. They don't get sick. They don't have any problems. They may not even know that they're sick or that they're a carrier of it. However, a lot of us are going to get the basic foodborne pathogen things where we have nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps, fever, general malaise, and it can last a pretty long time. Sometimes people are sick for weeks. Sometimes it takes a couple of days before they start getting sick. Sometimes you don't have many symptoms and you're over it very quickly. So someone with a very healthy immune system could get salmonella and be better in just a couple of days and really just have a stomach ache. While someone who's a little bit more sensitive or have a compromised immune system can get really, really seriously ill to the point where they have to get hospitalized. Most hospitalizations actually come from dehydration. It's just you're having so many stomach problems that people eventually get dehydrated. Really bad infections can spread to other parts of your body. You can get it in your blood, you can get it in your brain, and those become very, very serious and very life-threatening. But they all start off the same way.
Right. Now, since it's a bacteria, it is treatable with antibiotics. However, like with many other bacterium, are we seeing any increase in antibiotic resistance?
Yes, particularly with Salmonella typhi, there's been some cases where it has shown some resistance, which is a major concern because typhoid fever is very, very serious. It's not such a huge issue within the US because Salmonella typhi is not common in the US anymore, but that doesn't mean that it can't get over here because one of the things we'll talk about, I'm sure, is this onion outbreak comes from food outside of the US. So it's very possible that some of these antibiotic resistance and the more occurrence of these salmonellas that are happening are going to lead to more antibiotic resistance within the US.
Yeah, yeah. Since you do work in a laboratory, can you talk about the laboratory testing used for diagnosis?
Sure. So Microbac does not do any of the diagnostic testing once you're already sick. But if you are sick and you are hospitalized and you go to get tested, the interesting thing about this is they're going to start treatment based off of your symptoms, not necessarily based off of the diagnosis of salmonella. And that's because the test for salmonella takes longer than it is for most people to get over the illness. So traditionally, they're going to use a PCR method or an ELISA method testing stool or maybe even blood to see if the salmonella bacteria is present. But even once you do that and you find the presence of that bacteria's DNA or proteins of that, you still have to confirm it by using traditional culture methods, which can take days to complete. Just because salmonella is a gut bacteria, there's a lot of gut bacteria, and it can behave and look like a lot of other bacteria that are very similar. So they have to confirm what it is. What's more critical is doing things that we do like in Microbac, which is testing prior to being released to the public market. So we do a lot of that testing for vendors, suppliers, packagers, manufacturers to say, do you have salmonella in your product prior to releasing it outside, or do you have salmonella in your environment? So we do a lot of environmental testing. That environment is where your food is produced. So if you have salmonella on the floor, the chances of it getting up off the floor and into your food are there. So it needs to be addressed and taken care of before that food is released to the public. Because like we see with this onion recall, it can get massive very, very quickly, and then it can affect a lot of people. So it's really important that you get to that testing prior. Another really big thing on diagnostic testing that is kind of new is they're doing whole genomic sequencing. So if they say, we found salmonella in company A, and we found salmonella in company B, and we have patients 1, 2, and 3 who also have salmonella, they can actually go and look at all the base pairs of that salmonella and say they're exactly the same type of salmonella. They came from the same source and trace back to where it started, which gives us a better ability to prevent future outbreaks. And it's kind of new technology, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Is this the way that they really break down the would you say 2,500 different serovars?
Yep. So that it essentially has to do with what's on the outside of the salmonella. So even though they're all salmonella, they have different things on the outside that help them move around or help them infect. And we're looking at what those differences are. And that is just the serology of doing that is another part of salmonella that's very large. But they can even go as far in saying, you have this type of sero of salmonella and you have this type of sero of salmonella. Are they the exact same source? Because there's different base pairs that could occur there. So they've gone as far as to trace a person's illness back to the store, back to the person who packaged it, back to where the farm it came from by doing that kind of work. And not just in salmonella, in a lot of foodborne illnesses.
Right, exactly. And like I said in the intro, there's several multi-state salmonella outbreaks going on, and the largest one being the one from onions, which we mentioned is imported. And last numbers I saw was like 800 plus infections. Maybe that's more by now that we know of, right? Yeah. Trevor, can you offer any insights into this outbreak?
Sure. I think what we see now in our market is that a single producer isn't providing to an area. They're providing to a very, very large group of people. So I think what we saw maybe 10 years ago was a farm providing to 1 or 2 states. Now we see places that are mass producing and shipping across the US, which is I think what we're seeing here with these onions, because it is affecting, I think, 20 plus states at this point, and it's a lot of people. And it's very, very easy to transfer salmonella. Some bacteria are really sensitive in the sense that they have to have the right growing conditions and the right nutrients and the right amount of oxygen. Salmonella is not like that. It will do great in any situation you have, pretty much. It's very resistant to acid. It's very resistant to heat. So making sure that you have those things in place is really important. And what can happen is a single farmer may have another farmer up a hill who uses litter as a fertilizer from chickens that is contaminated with salmonella. Rainwater can then transfer that salmonella down to another farm, which can transfer it to another farm, which then goes to a single packing plant, which contaminates everything that comes in there, which then goes out to everybody in the US. So these types of massive outbreaks are going to, I think, be more common just because that's the way the food market is working. And it is really critical to put those control steps so we don't have these issues come into place. But it's also very easy for these issues to happen.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to just say on the side, I'd like to give a hat tip to the epidemiologists and the microbiologists that worked on this, because a lot of time foodborne outbreaks are very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, they never really truly figure out where it came from and the like. So, right. I mean,
When you think about
the fact they figured
onions,
this one out was pretty great.
yeah. When you think about onions, it's not a food that you eat by itself. It's something that you eat with another meal, and it's mixed in with other things. And sometimes it's cooked and sometimes it's not. So going back and saying, you know, I have a person from this state and a person from this state that are sick with the same salmonella, they may not have anything in common that they actually ate, because you have to break it down to the ingredients, which then have to go back to the farm, which have to go back to the vendor, to the farm, to the supplier, to the location. And it can be very, very difficult to track foodborne illness, which is why there's probably so many cases of it that we just don't know how to stop it in some situations, because we don't know where it started.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, really good point. Trevor, last question, and I want to go ahead and close with some general food safety and handling tips. What can people do to prevent stuff like salmonella and related type of foodborne illness?
Yeah.
What are the best things they can do?
So I always think it's kind of have to be an approach from multiple angles. You have to have the manufacturer being responsible and doing the testing and cleanliness that they need in producing a food. And then you have to have a vendor be responsible and require that testing so that they're not getting in a substandard product. And then a consumer, you have to be able to handle products correctly. So no matter what you do, raw chicken is likely going to be contaminated with salmonella. It is less likely to be occurring in other foods, but raw meat's a big one. If you're not using the right types of techniques and things inside of your kitchen, you can easily contaminate other items in your kitchen. So, making sure you use clean cutting boards, making sure you're washing your hands, using clean tools, cooking your food thoroughly is a huge deal. People like to say, oh yeah, I cooked it, but did you get it up to the right temperature for the right amount of time in order to kill that deadly salmonella that can be there? Are you putting your food in your refrigerator in a way that the most dangerous products aren't going to drip, some salmonella chicken juice onto your ready-to-eat carrots or your baby carrots or something like that? Because that's really easy to cross-contaminate, which also adds into why it's really hard to trace back where salmonella comes from. Because just because I got sick from eating chicken or eating carrots doesn't mean that it necessarily came from those carrots. Did it come from the chicken that was also stored in the same refrigerator? Or did I not clean my knife or use a different cutting board? I always tell this people, like, don't be offended if I come to your place and don't eat. I'm a food pathogen. This is what I do. I get very nervous when I eat out at places and see people's kitchens, because I don't know if they have the type of cleanliness that I know can cause salmonella and those types of things. So I try to be nice about it and just eat some potato chips here and there, but it gets very nervous sometimes.
And something else I'd just like to point out is sometimes we're seeing some cross-contamination with pet food, right?
Yeah.
The raw pet foods and stuff like that. So, that's always a possibility if you're not careful with handling certain types of pet food.
Yeah, your pets eat out of the trash. Mine does. He's behind me somewhere here. So they're probably not going to get as sick from salmonella as a person would, but just having something that's contaminated with salmonella in your living space near your kitchen or that you're touching is a risk to transferring it to somewhere else in your house or in your food. So salmonella is a huge concern in pet food, pet treats. So I wash my hands after I give them food. I wash my hands after I give them treats, and I don't prepare them in the same place that I do my actual food. It's really, really easy to transfer around. And I think sometimes people underestimate how easy it is, or, I just touched this for a second, no big deal. It could be a big deal.
Yeah. And does salmonella, does it require a large inoculum to get infected?
Yes and no. It grows very quickly. So you can have a very small amount in a food that grows to a point that can cause pathogenic problems very quickly. It's also very resistant to a lot of things in your body. It naturally is found in your gut. So even one cell that gets into your body could eventually get to the levels where it could cause pathogens. Unlikely, it's probably going to get killed off by other bacteria or other white blood cells in your body, but it could happen, especially to some of these more resistant salmonellas that we're starting to see emerging. One cell can issue an outbreak is the thing I've always said. So
yeah. Okay, well, great advice, great information, and I wanted to thank you, Trevor Craig, for sharing your time and expertise with me once again. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.